At the start of the film, a car speeds down the road with police in hot pursuit. Then, the story rewinds 24 hours earlier. Brian, a forensic accountant, has recently married Emily. He's now coaching a lacrosse game where his stepson Lucas is also on the team. Although Lucas plays poorly, Brian still includes him, which irritates the other boys. Feeling embarrassed, Lucas offers to sit out, but Brian encourages him to play, telling him this could be his hero moment, like in the sports movies where everything slows down and the hero makes the winning shot. Motivated, Lucas runs back onto the field, catches the ball, and, in slow motion, charges forward, only to be knocked down by his opponents. Later, Emily sighs and tells Brian that Lucas isn't really into lacrosse, or sports in general, since he's more interested in dance. But Brian insists that this is how he and his own father used to bond. Emily gently tells him to give Lucas time. He'll warm up to him eventually. Then Brian goes to check on Lucas, only to find him being bullied by his classmates. Brian storms in, furious, and threatens the bullies, telling them that if they ever touch his son again, he'll kick their ass. One of the boys challenges him. Putting on fake bravado, Brian says he'd love to, but says he has a dinner reservation, then leaves. Outside, Brian offers to go back and confront the bullies, but Lucas tells him not to bother because he's used to it since they bully him every day. Brian tells Emily what happened. She suggests talking to the principal, but Brian says that'll just make things worse. Lucas will be labeled a snitch and get targeted even more. He says they'll deal with it later and heads to work. At his company, Brian's boss asks him to adjust the numbers on the balance sheet to avoid pressure from upper management. Brian refuses, and as a result, gets fired. That evening, he breaks the news to Emily. She takes a moment, then reminds him that she still has an open offer from her old law firm. Brian looks surprised. He thought she wanted to stay home with Lucas. Emily nods, but points out that they need income, and that Brian could use the opportunity to bond with Lucas by being a stay-at-home dad. Brian looks unconvinced, but she assures him it's only temporary. The next morning, Brian is surprised to see Lucas still at home. Lucas explains that it's a teacher in service day, when teachers use the time to learn new skills. When Lucas says he's hungry, Brian, not knowing how to cook, suggests intermittent fasting instead, saying it's good for health. Lucas, still hungry, tells him it's fine. He'll just make himself a sandwich. Later, at the park, a woman approaches Brian and introduces herself as Leslie, along with the rest of her group, who call themselves the Mama Mafia. When Brian asks what they do, Leslie explains that after dropping their kids off, they usually go to Chili's for lunch and drinks. She invites him to join, but he politely declines. Just then, his phone pings. It's Lucas's GPS tracker, which Emily got for him because he tends to wander off.
I'll see you later.
No, you won't, Brian.
Brian finds Lucas and starts tossing a football with him. Frustrated by Lucas's weak throws, Brian watches another father and son playing nearby. Trying to show off, he throws harder at Lucas, but soon the man joins in. He introduces himself as Jeff and gives Brian some throwing tips, though Brian insists he already knows what he's doing. Jeff doesn't take the hint and calls over his son, CJ, to play with Lucas. Jeff points out that their sons seem to be getting along, until CJ catches a butterfly and eats it. Jeff sighs, saying that his kid would always put random stuff in his mouth. He asks Brian if his kid ever went through that phase. Yeah, when he was 1, Brian replies. Brian introduces himself. Jeff mentions that he used to be in the army, and there, he had a friend named Brai, who once defused an IED using a severed Taliban hand. Brian then asks if his friend died in action. Jeff says no, and that he actually got crushed by a van leaving Chipotle. Lucas then asks his dad if they can visit CJ's house, saying they have a tree that looks just like Mark Ruffalo.
CJ's cool. He said my hoodie's dope.
Brian reluctantly agrees. Jeff is thrilled and goes to high-five CJ, but CJ punches him instead. Brian's taken aback as Jeff roughhouses with his son, who seems surprisingly strong and aggressive. Before heading to Jeff's house, Brian sends Emily their location and Jeff's contact, just in case. Inside, Lucas notices a picture of Jeff in uniform. Jeff explains that it was taken with Brai and their commander, Colonel Kurtz, from the Special Forces Operational Detachment. Lucas is impressed until Jeff starts describing gruesome details from his missions, smiling the whole time. Jeff then suddenly points a gun at Brian, which turns out to be a sauce dispenser. Moments later, Lucas returns. wide-eyed, saying how cool and strong Jeff is. Brian tells him it must be genetics and mutters that guys built like that usually don't live long. Later, Jeff reveals that his wife passed away a few months ago. Brian apologizes, but Jeff brushes it off. He explains that he had saved some money from his security gig, which allowed them to move to a new town. He thought he'd give the stay-at-home dad thing a try. Then Jeff asks Brian if his wife is dead too. Brian says no, explaining that his wife is a lawyer and he used to be a forensic accountant until he got fired. Curious about CJ's odd behavior, he asks Jeff for the boy's full name and he replies, "Christopher Jiff, like the peanut butter?" Brian asks. Jeff nods and says his wife loved that peanut butter brand so much that she named their son after it. Suddenly, Lucas runs inside and tells Brian there's a man watching them. Jeff quickly tells the boys they're going to Buc-ee Cheese for lunch. At the restaurant, Jeff tells Brian that he likes God so much because the first time CJ met his best friend, he also met his own new best friend. However, Brian tells him that things are moving too fast and they should get to know each other better first. While Brian is talking, Jeff tunes him out and notices a man in a leather jacket watching them. Jeff grabs their game tickets, exchanges them for a super sock, fills it with coins, and heads to a back room. He accidentally knocks out the wrong man before finding the right one. A brutal fight breaks out, and Jeff gains the upper hand. He punches the man and demands, "How did you find me?" The man passes out. Meanwhile, outside, Brian is forced to take a picture with a mascot for a promotion he clearly doesn't enjoy. When the pizza arrives, CJ looks at it curiously and asks what it is. Brian and Lucas are shocked that CJ doesn't know what pizza is. Brian asks, "Did your father never take you out for pizza?" CJ casually replies, "Jeff isn't my father. He took me." Shocked, Brian decides to leave the restaurant, but the hostess stops him, saying he can't go since his wristband doesn't match CJ's. She asks CJ if he knows Brian. CJ answers, "I don't know any of these people." At that moment, Jeff charges toward the mascot, and chaos erupts as they all flee the establishment. Outside, Brian demands to know why CJ said Jeff isn't his dad. Jeff calmly replies, "Because it's the truth." Suddenly, the man in the leather jacket bursts out of the restaurant. Jeff tells Brian to get in the car as gunfire erupts. While Jeff drives evasively, Brian yells, "Why are they trying to kill me?" Jeff answers casually, "Because they think you know." "Know what?" Brian shouts. Jeff tells the kids to put on their headphones and watch a movie. He then explains that the men are after CJ because he rescued the boy from bad people. On the highway, Brian spots an Amber Alert flashing on a billboard. Jeff sighs and says, "Yours looks better than mine did." Brian demands that Jeff pull over so he can call the police, but realizes he left his phone back at Buc-ee Cheese. Just then, Emily calls Jeff's phone after trying Brian's. Jeff answers enthusiastically, telling her Brian has talked about her a lot. Emily, unaware she's on speaker, tells Brian that Jeff sounds cool, not like the weirdo Brian told her he was. Before Brian can respond, he spots another car closing in on them and ends the call. Jeff skillfully maneuvers through traffic and loses their pursuers. Just as they catch their breath, police cars begin chasing them, until a black SUV rams a patrol car. Ahead, they encounter the Mama Mafia, Leslie and her group of moms. Leslie sees the Amber Alert on her phone and tells the others to box in the vehicle. Jeff spots Leslie and mutters, "She's hot, dude. I don't know if I can kill her." She instructs her son to tase the driver, whom she calls a pervert. Jeff rams their car, and the boy accidentally tases his own mother. Moments later, the black car tailing them gets crushed by a truck. An hour after, Jeff parks the car, but it rolls backward. Brian tells Jeff to grab it, but Jeff shrugs, saying he'll just have to steal another one anyway, especially now that the car's been tagged in an Amber Alert. Brian insists on leaving, but Jeff warns him that if he does, the men will come after him and his family too. Finally, Jeff opens up. After leaving the army, he took a security job at a top-secret facility, never knowing who owned it or what went on inside. His job was just to patrol, and he'd occasionally have to take random drug tests. The only other person he ever saw there was a bearded guy who looked like Zach Galifianakis, so Jeff nicknamed him Zach. He continues, "A few weeks ago, a mysterious package arrived at the facility. Jeff didn't want to leave it outside, so he brought it in. That's when he heard a noise behind one of the doors and found a boy who said his name was CJ. Brian urges Jeff that they should go to the police, but Jeff refuses. He explains that he already tried. He took CJ to the police, told them the boy wasn't his kid but clearly someone's child, and that he stole him. Now people are after them, but the police tried to arrest him instead. Meanwhile, the kids wander into a candy store and come out completely wired on sugar. At the same time, the black cars arrive in the area. The men have also taken Brian's cell phone and are using the GPS tracker on Lucas to locate CJ. Lucas and CJ spot the men and take off running. They eventually stumble upon Lucas's bullies. This time, however, CJ steps in and takes the bullies down with ease. Back with Brian, he asks Jeff if there's anything else he's lied about, other than his wife being dead and CJ being his son. Jeff hesitates, then admits that CJ's name isn't actually Christopher, and that he doesn't even know what the boy's full name really is. Just then, they notice the black cars approaching. Jeff suggests stealing a car, but Brian refuses and runs off to save his son instead. Gunfire erupts as the men open fire. Brian reaches Lucas and CJ, who are taking cover. Lucas panics and asks where Jeff is, since he's the one who can actually protect them. At that moment, a man advances toward them with a gun. Suddenly, Jeff appears out of nowhere and runs the man over with a car. The group manages to escape, but Brian can't figure out how the men keep tracking them. Then it hits him, his phone. He realizes the men must be using its GPS. He quickly tells Lucas to turn it off before they're found again. Lucas thanks CJ for saving him earlier. In the front, Brian opens up to Jeff about not feeling like a good dad. Jeff disagrees, telling him that he is a good father. He's got the instinct to protect his kid, and Lucas clearly loves him, unlike CJ. Brian admits that he thought he'd have kids in his 20s or 30s but didn't. Then God put Emily in his life, someone he says is way out of his league.
Totally out of your league. Like, what?
Brian continues, saying that when Lucas first called him dad, it was the best feeling in the world. Still, he sometimes feels Lucas deserves a younger, cooler father. Jeff tells him he is cool, and that he would have done anything to have a dad like Brian. Brian clears his throat and tells Jeff to take them somewhere off the grid. Jeff drives them to a retirement home, where he introduces his estranged father, Gordon, a man who abandoned him when he was 4. Gordon notices CJ and assumes he's Jeff's son. Jeff corrects him, saying CJ isn't his kid, but Gordon looks unconvinced. Gordon then tells Jeff that he dropped him off at an orphanage because he didn't know how to care for him after losing his wife. He admits he was young, stupid, and overwhelmed, but insists he kept tabs on Jeff over the years. Jeff, staring at CJ, is struck by how much the boy looks like him, and slowly comes to the shocking conclusion that CJ might actually be his son. Brian asks if Jeff knows who the mother could be. Jeff awkwardly admits he doesn't, saying he slept around a lot back then. Excited, Jeff turns to CJ and tells him they're going to be a great team. Then Jeff informs Gordon that he's in trouble and asks if he can watch the kids for a while. Gordon refuses. Back in the car, Brian tells Jeff they need to find out why someone would take his child and lock him up. Jeff shrugs and says, "Why would anyone want a kid from me? You saw my dad." He explains that this is why he joined the army, to find a sense of family. But even then, he says he failed. He recalls refusing to shoot a child suicide bomber during his service. His commander, Kurtz, was disappointed but still called him his perfect soldier. Jeff says, "He had my back." Brian replies, "That's what it's all about, letting them know we've got their backs." Later at lunch, Brian notices that Jeff and CJ eat in perfect synchronization. Curious, he asks Jeff if he remembers anyone else from the top-secret facility he used to guard. Suddenly, Jeff recalls Zach. Brian asks how they can find him. Jeff suggests using a dating app. Since Zach used to come to him for help setting up his profiles, Jeff creates a fake account and messages Zach. But Zach quickly catches on, thinking it's a bot, and blocks him. So Brian decides to use Emily's photo instead. Posing as her, he messages Zach. After some flirty back and forth, Zach agrees to meet Emily in a hotel room. When Zach arrives, Jeff ambushes and ties him up. He demands to know why they kidnapped CJ and locked him in the facility. When Zach refuses to answer, so Jeff threatens to waterboard him, basically just pouring cold water on his head, but Zach still gives him nothing. Then Brian tries a different tactic, threatening him with cosmetic travel kit. Zach laughs, vowing that nothing will make him talk. Brian then throws a wad of cash on the table. That does the trick. Zach finally reveals that CJ isn't Jeff's son at all, He's a clone of Jeff. CJ's full name, he explains, stands for Clone Jeff. Zach tells them CJ is stronger and smarter than Jeff. Brian asks Zach why he'd clone Jeff.
No, I didn't clone anyone. I'm just like a babysitter.
Then who did this?
When he refuses to name who, Jeff picks up a lamp, ready to swing it. Terrified, Zach blurts out a name: Simon Maddox. Brian quickly searches the name on Jeff's phone and discovers Simon Maddox is a billionaire tech mogul from Silicon Valley. Just then, Brian gets a call from Emily. He answers, but only hears heavy breathing on the other end. Then, through the phone, he sees Emily on a live feed putting away groceries. A man's voice threatens to harm her unless Brian hands over CJ. The caller then sends him a set of coordinates and orders Brian to drive there. In the car, Jeff praises Brian for finding Simon's location so fast. Jeff thanks him for the earlier pep talk and admits he's starting to bond with CJ more now. "I'm going to be the best dad," he says with quiet determination. They arrive at a vast, empty clearing. Moments later, several black cars pull up, surrounding them. Brian tells Lucas to get back in the car, then turns to Jeff and apologizes. He admits the men had threatened to kill Emily, and that's why he drove them here. Simon steps out of one of the cars while his henchman drags CJ away. Jeff begs to say goodbye to him, but Simon coldly tells him that CJ isn't capable of forming any emotional attachment. Jeff refuses to believe it, calling it nonsense, and tells CJ that he loves him. He promises he'll find him and make things right.
Do you feel anything at all?
No.
Then he raises his hand for a high five, but CJ leaves him hanging. At that moment, Lucas runs towards CJ, gives him his hoodie, and hugs him tightly before CJ is taken away. One of Simon's men aims his gun at Jeff, ready to fire. But Brian, in a burst of panic, slams his foot on the gas and tries to run the man over, with his eyes closed. He misses completely. When he opens his eyes, he asks Lucas if he took the guy out and looked cool doing it. Lucas shakes his head. Brian sighs and admits he's not badass or cool at all. Lucas smiles and tells him he loves him the way he is. Brian apologizes to Jeff again and says they need to go save CJ. But Jeff insists it is pointless because CJ probably does not even want to be rescued. Just then, a ping sounds from the man's jacket. Jeff checks and finds Brian's phone. Brian then asks Lucas where the tracker is. Lucas says it's in the hoodie. "The same hoodie he gave to CJ," Brian exclaims. "I thought you turned it off." "I did," Lucas says. CJ must have turned it back on. Realizing CJ's location can be tracked, they follow the signal, only to discover it's leading them straight to Jeff's old workplace. When they arrive, Brian leaves Lucas in the car for safety, while he and Jeff sneak in. Brian awkwardly climbs over the gate, only to see Jeff walk up and open it manually. Inside, they split up to cover more ground. Brian eventually finds CJ, but Jeff runs into something way worse. Another Jeff. The clones attack, and Jeff fights hard, taking the two of them down. But they end up getting cornered again by even more Jeff clones. They run toward an exit, but as soon as they reach the doorway, it closes. Then the clones runs towards them, but an invisible field stops them. Eventually, they both get captured, but Jeff punches the henchman and gives Brian time to escape. The henchman then drags Jeff to Simon, where, standing beside him, is none other than Colonel Kurtz, Jeff's old commanding officer. Kurtz greets him almost fondly, saying he always liked Jeff but couldn't stand his flaw: empathy.
I couldn't do it.
He explains that Jeff wasn't the only soldier who disappointed his country, so he sought to create the perfect one. That's when he discovered Simon's brilliant cloning research. Using DNA taken from Jeff during his so-called random drug tests, Kurtz combined Jeff's superior physical traits with artificial obedience. He boasts that the clones never tire, never question orders, and never feel. He hands a crossbow to CJ and orders him to kill Jeff. Jeff looks CJ in the eyes and tells him he's not a machine, that they're the same. CJ hesitates, then suddenly turns and shoots Simon instead. Chaos erupts. Jeff and CJ fight side by side. Taking down the remaining clones, Kurtz grabs a gun and aims it at Jeff. But before he can fire, Brian comes barreling through in a car, trying once again to run the villain over. But he misses, again. Brian asks Lucas if he ran over that man and looked cool this time. Lucas grins and says, "Yeah, you did. Totally badass." After the dust settles, Jeff walks up to CJ. Instead of a high five, CJ hugs him. They all escape the facility as Jeff detonates explosives, destroying the entire building behind them. Weeks later, Jeff shows up at Brian's house, casually knocking on the door. When Brian answers, Jeff says someone set fire to his house. Brian immediately asks if it was Simon's men. Jeff shakes his head. Nah, different bad guys this time, but don't worry, I'll fill you in.